Hello, everyone, and welcome to another X's and Dogs podcast. Today, I join you early Wednesday morning of what has turned out to be a pretty quiet Browns news week. Whenever you're looking at the entire NFL, though, there's been some rather interesting things that have went down that we need to talk about. I think, a couple of these things will have an impact on the Browns in more of a macro sense. And also I want to talk about some of the updates that have went down this week when looking at the Browns head coaching position. It's just that time of the year where things slow down for the NFL teams that are out of the playoffs. The only real news coming out are about the teams who are looking for a head coach. Of course, the Browns are one of those teams, so that gives us a little bit of extra something to talk about during this slow period, but just not a lot going on, whenever you're thinking about the players in general. It's more kind of organizational decisions right now, and honestly kind of a lot of just hypothesizing because we don't have any real information on a shortened list of maybe like 3 guys the Browns are looking at for the head coaching position. It's kind of just this long laundry list of individuals who the Browns have, said that they are either going to interview or have already interviewed. We can start there because a few names have been added, or I guess a couple names have been added to that list over the course of the week here. And an important note that I want to make is whenever I filmed the head coaching tiers video this past weekend, the Browns hadn't announced that they were going to interview Nate Scheelhaase. Hopefully I'm pronouncing that right. I've heard a lot of different pronunciations of that name, and I'm not 100% sure that it's Nate Scheelhaase, but that's how I would go about pronouncing it. Sorry if that's wrong. I'll fix it in the future. And then also Grant Udinski was added to that list as well. I really want to talk about Grant Udinski because I think he's the one of these 2 candidates that I see being a real option as the head coach. And he's also a guy who I've seen Browns fans really take a liking towards and find interest in him potentially becoming the coach of this football team next year. Whenever you start the conversation about Grant Udinski, you have to start with his age. He just turned 30, I think literally yesterday. So, obviously a very young candidate. I'm pretty sure McVay on the Rams started when he was 30. But apart from him, that's, he's kind of the only outlier. Mostly guys who take over and become successful head coaches are above the age of 35 or 40. That's not saying that a guy who's 30 can't have success, but there's just not a huge track record of that going on in the NFL. And Sean McVay, I think, represents the outlier, represents the chance of that happening. But I guess that's a good place to start with Grant because, the reality of the situation is there's going to be players on the team who are older than him. Your best players probably, and Myles Garrett is going to be older than him, not by a lot, but I just think that creates some interesting dynamics in a locker room. And if we do decide to move forward with Udinski, which, I do want to say, I don't think that should be a, limiting factor in hiring Grant Udinski. I think it's something that should be taken into consideration. But I don't think if you really love him as a candidate and you think he can turn this Browns offense around, turn this team around in a more positive direction next year, unlock some things with Shedeur Sanders or Deshaun Watson or quarterback X that you get this offseason, then you should hire him regardless of his age, because I think his personality seems to be a guy who can, be a leader in the locker room despite his age. So that's important to mention. And I guess looking at Grant's background, he started in the league under Matt Rule in Carolina, I believe, just like 5 or 6 years ago now. Being an assistant with him for a couple years. Then he moved out to Minnesota under Kevin O'Connell, was an assistant there, got kind of promoted every year out there in Minnesota. And then after getting promoted a couple times in Minnesota, took the offensive coordinator job in Jacksonville. And obviously we saw what that offense was able to do this season, being one of the most efficient offenses in the league, which is really impressive for him going in there on, in his first real season as an offensive coordinator, being able to help an offense put production like that out. And, I want to say the other important factor in his career so far is everywhere he's went, there's been resounding positive feedback from players and coaches about this guy. Like, you listen to Matt Rule talk about him, it's, his work ethics like none other. He understands offense like none other. You listen to O'Connell talk about him, and, I think he said during the interview, it was like this guy was, I believe he said, able to like completely build a car whenever he's interviewing for being an employee at a car wash, like something like that, like completely over qualified for the position that he was interviewing for. And that speaks to just his knowledge and his ability to coach the game of football. So, and then you move into Jacksonville. It seems like he was always with Trevor Lawrence this year, and Trevor Lawrence is just speaking of him so highly, talking about how, he made the game easier for him this year, and he was able to unlock that offense kind of down there in a year where they obviously turned things around very, very quickly. So, like, these are the things we want to hear from a serious candidate for the Browns head coaching position. And my take on Grant Udinski is this: like, I think he is going to be one of those next great offensive minds in this league. It seems that his work ethic and his knowledge and his just pure X's and O's and being able to scheme things up and all of that is very, very much ahead of where it would be for other 30-year-olds. And it seems he's able to really get the respect of players, which is important. So, yeah, I think he will be a successful offensive coach in this league. It's pretty apparent that'll be the case, and he already kind of is. So my stance on Udinski for the Browns is if they believe in 5 years he can be one of the best offensive coaches in the league, they should just hire him now, regardless of if it might be a little bit ahead of the curve, as far as the age goes. Like, there's a good chance if we wait on it, like the Browns are in a situation where if we wait on a coach to become a very established guy in the league, we're more than likely not going to be able to bring him in here because we never have a franchise quarterback. We have Jimmy Haslam as our owner. The reputation is that the organization is just kind of cursed and has no culture inside the building. So the best way for us to go about getting the next Sean McVay, the next Kyle Shanahan, the next Kevin O'Connell, the next, you name the offensive guy that's killing it here in the NFL, is being early on that train and bringing him in before other organizations, would be comfortable doing so because he hasn't proven it enough. And that's just a risk that the Browns more than likely are going to have to take. And it seems they're willing to take that because, Nate Scheelhaus and Grant Udinski are both 30-year-old individuals who, I believe Scheelhaus is maybe a little older, but they're both very young. And, the consistent idea there is we're trying to kick the can on these young offensive-minded individuals before the rest of the league kind of catches up there. And I think that's probably the route they always planned on going down. It seems to be a fit in the brain of Andrew Berry. Like, that's the way I would imagine he would look at the situation. And so I'm not surprised there. But ultimately, yeah, I think Grant Udinski should 100% be a real candidate for the Browns. On the surface, if you're not familiar with Grant and his background, I can understand why you would think this is like kind of a silly interview to have and it doesn't make any sense to hire this guy. I've heard members of the Browns media kind of reiterate that fact, but the situation is quite different, becomes quite different whenever you start to understand his background a little bit. Seems to be a very impressive individual. The next thing I want to talk about is Harbaugh, John Harbaugh, and the situation going on there. It appears that the Browns have kind of been eliminated from consideration. For a while, for probably about a week, it seemed to me that there was some smoke building up between Harbaugh and the Browns, and there was clearly some conversations being had between his agents and the Browns organization. But what appears to have happened is John limited down 3 jobs. I don't have those jobs in front of me. I think it's the Falcons, the Giants, and one other team who I can't, maybe it's the Raiders. But there's 3 teams that that Harbaugh kind of narrowed things down to. And these are the teams he's going to actually go in person and have an interview with, it appears. The Browns are not on that list. That news came out late yesterday. And, to me, that's a little bit surprising. I thought it made a lot of sense for Harbaugh to, even if he's not considering the Browns, to come in for an interview because, you have Jimmy Haslam who's willing to throw money around, and you can kind of use that as leverage to sweeten the deal with the other organizations. Say, the Browns offered me this, you guys are offering me this. I really want to work for you, but I need you to meet that offer. Doing some business deals like that, I think would have probably played in Harbaugh's favor. Maybe he doesn't even care about the money that much. And maybe he doesn't want to, maybe he's at a point in his career where he doesn't want to come in and interview for a job that he knows he's not actually going to take. That's, more than likely what's going on here. So I'm not like ultimately too surprised that he's eliminated us from consideration. But the surprise to me comes where, it did seem like there was some smoke and there was going to be a good chance that he would come into Cleveland for an interview. Maybe he still does. Crazier things have happened. But what, my take on that is the Browns should not overinvest in John Harbaugh, not, completely bog down the rest of their coaching search, centered around the idea that they could potentially get John Harbaugh. I think it's clear at this point right now, we are not on the list for Harbaugh, the list of consideration. And it should be a moment right now where we pivot off that and fully go into the rest of the candidates who there are still some good ones. It's going to take some, more interviewing, some more consideration, some more digging to find these good ones, to find the right good one, I guess. But it's time to shift, fully focus into that. And I hope that's the route the Browns go down here. And I really hope they don't. And honestly, it's going to be Jimmy that would do this. I hope that he doesn't continue to just try and force a square peg into a round hole, and kind of bring and try to force John to come in here and go get an interview and overpay him, and the whole situation that would follow that, to me, just doesn't seem very beneficial for this Browns organization right now. But that kind of wraps up the Browns coaching news. I do want to talk briefly about Mike Tomlin. Obviously, if you don't live under a rock, you know that Tomlin, I guess, resigned from the job in Pittsburgh. To me, that comes to no surprise. I talked about it, I think last week or the week before. It was last week, after the Harbaugh firing, that if the Steelers did go out and get beat pretty bad at home against the Texans, which they did, I thought there was a legitimate chance that there would be a separation between Harbaugh and the Steelers. What that looked like, I didn't know for sure. I thought maybe the Steelers would just fire him. But I'm sure both parties kind of met there and were like, we just need to move on. Like, I'm sure the Steelers are ready to find a new coach. I'm sure Tomlin's ready to move on with his career and his life, whatever that entails. So no real surprise there. The thing that I want to discuss a little bit in today's podcast, because we're talking about the Browns, this is a Browns show, is, I've seen a decent amount of people on social media express interest in pursuing Mike Tomlin as the next Browns head coach. And I think here's the thing that you need to keep in mind, and I'm not sure everyone is super informed on this, but since Tomlin was not fired, it was him resigning, he's still under contract there in Pittsburgh. Like, that contract has not expired yet. I'm not sure how many more years he has on the deal, but it's at least another 2 years, I believe, because I think even if a team gets him next year, he's still under contract with the Steelers. So what that means is whoever wants to go out there and bring in Mike Tomlin is going to have to trade with the Steelers. It's kind of a very similar situation to Sean Payton with the Saints moving to the Broncos. Like, the Broncos traded, I believe it was a second-round pick, maybe even a first-round pick. I can't remember now for sure, but it was a high draft pick to bring in Sean Payton. And I think it's going to be a really similar situation with Mike Tomlin. Both of those guys had won a Super Bowl, had a ton of success, sustained success at these teams, and kind of just staled over time. And we know how well that's worked out for Sean Payton in Denver. So I think that's going to even more, I guess, improve the price to go out there and bring in Mike Tomlin for whatever team decides to do that next season. It seems likely to be next season. He seems to want to take a year off from coaching, which I am not surprised by. I thought that was definitely a possibility. I thought even for Harbaugh that was a possibility. I'm to be honest, a little surprised that Harbaugh is not taking a year off. I guess with his age, it's just a little bit more urgent to get back in the swing of coaching with the amount of years he potentially has left to coach in this league. But, Harbaugh being a little younger, Tomlin being a little younger, can probably afford to take that year off, reflect, refresh, be better next year. But whatever team decides to trade for him, more than likely next season, is going to have to trade with the Pittsburgh Steelers. And what that means to me is that any team in the AFC North can pretty much be taken out of the conversation. And I think more than likely any team who's going to compete in the AFC, so if the Bills are looking for a new coach next year, if the Chiefs are looking for a new coach next year, maybe whatever other team is truly competing to win the AFC, I think you can kind of remove them too. the Steelers are going to be very diligent with the way they go about trading Mike Tomlin. They don't want to trade him to a team that they feel they're going to have to compete with frequently. So what that means for us Browns fans is we can kind of just forget the idea that there's a chance we get Mike Tomlin. I know even if we bring in another head coach this season, they could get fired in the span of the next year, and we could be in the search whenever Tomlin's name kind of reappears. But even in that case, I think the deal the Browns would have to offer to the Steelers to bring him in, if that deal even exists, it will be so much inflated in comparison to other teams just because we're in the AFC North with them. That's the way I view the situation, and that's why I'm really not considering Mike Tomlin a possibility for this football team. It would have been different if they did fire him and terminate his contract and make him available to go out and be like a free agent coach, like John Harbaugh, like Kevin Stefanski, like Mike McDaniel. But that's not the situation that's going on here, and it really limits the Browns' possibilities to entertain that idea. And that's why I think we can all kind of put a stop to the conversations of being interested in Mike Tomlin. It doesn't really matter if you're interested. Of course, it would be great having a coach who's been so successful here in Cleveland, and I'm not going to hear you guys. I don't want to hear you guys on the whole playoff thing. I get it. He's not a very successful playoff coach, but the Browns need to crawl before they can walk here. They need to crawl before they can run. We never consistently make it to the playoffs. We've made it 2 times in the past, 2.5 decades, 3 times, I guess, since coming back. And it's just not, I don't have the mindset of passing on or being too good for a coach who goes to the playoffs all the time. But that idea doesn't matter because we're not going to be able to bring him in. And that's the bottom line here. So, hopefully you guys are in agreement with me on that idea. I'm sure we'll start to get some hirings in the NFL for all the head coaching vacancies, which is now turned into, I believe it's like 10 jobs open. So things have really opened up. I even at the beginning of the kind of cycle here after the season ended, there was an idea that there'd be less teams looking for jobs than normal here. Well, quickly that's turned into about a third of the league is looking for a new head coach. So I'm sure we're going to start to see some hirings. I think once John Harbaugh either narrows it down to a couple teams or gets hired with somebody, I think that's going to kind of be the first domino to fall, and then the rest of the candidates are going to start to get hired at different places because teams are kind of just being held back by the potential of getting a guy like Harbaugh. So I think we'll start to get some news here in the next week or two, and maybe the Browns even make a hiring in the next week or two. I'd say definitely by the end of January, we'll probably know who the head coach is going to be, just based on history and what normally happens. So all that said, we'll be here with you guys on the X's and Dogs talking about it every step of the way, and through free agency, through the draft, through the trades that the Browns make with the new head coach, all of that. As always, please hit the like button if you are enjoying the X's and Dogs show. We are still growing. We would love it if you share the podcast to your friends who are fellow Browns fans and want to hear and talk about the Browns. It means a lot to us. But as always, have a great rest of your day. I will talk to you all very, very soon. Bye-bye.